Greetings, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome, wherever you're tuning in from around the world. Welcome to this side event at the Ticad Ministerial Meeting, Peace, Governance, and Development in Africa. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. I'm Henry Bomsu, a TV and radio broadcaster from the UK and Ghana. Now, this session is co-organized by two serious bodies. One is the Institute of Security Studies in Africa and the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. And it comes as the world struggles to build and sustain peace across the globe. In Africa, countries that struggle with the Sustainable Development Goals are typically either in conflict or vulnerable to violent conflict. The UN Secretary General's report on promotion of durable peace and sustainable development in Africa cites a 30% increase in the number of violent wars and conflict in Africa from 2015 to 2020. The Global Terrorism Index 2020 shows that 10 African nations rank among the world's top 20 impacted by terrorism. The adverse effects of climate change are exacerbating conflicts in the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and parts of Southern Africa. Governance is also under pressure. Between 2000 and 2021, 21 coups d'etat occurred in 14 African countries. Other challenges include inadequate representation of women and youth in decision-making, increased human rights violations, disregard for the rule of law, and a rise in disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. The COVID-19 pandemic has also damaged governance and peace building in Africa, with misinformation, heavy-handed restrictions, and increased radicalization, all fraying the social fabric. So, this side event aims to identify enablers of and obstacles to conflict, prevention and resolution, the prevention of violent extremism, and democratic governance across Africa. So a very hefty agenda, and we can't wait to get started. But before moving on to our speakers, let me notify you of the following. This event will be recorded and put onto the UNDP YouTube channel, so please refrain from recording using your own device. Simultaneous interpretation service is available in French, Arabic, Portuguese, and Japanese. So please choose the language of your preference using the button on the bottom of the screen. And during the event, I'm pleased to say you are welcome to send in questions and comments using the Q&A box in writing. Right, we're ready to start. So let us move on to the opening remarks by Madame Ahuna Ezeakona, UNDP Assistant Administrator and Regional Director for Africa. And the UNDP, of course, is co-organizer of today's event. Madame Ezeakona.
Excellencies, partners, distinguished participants, it is my great honor to deliver the opening remarks for this high-level side event on the margins of the Ticad Ministerial Meeting. You know, UNDP's long-standing partnership with Ticad partners has been instrumental in strengthening the capacity of the African Union and other regional and international institutions to deliver on peace, on governance, and also on development priorities. Africa is currently at a critical turning point. Conflict remains a challenge on the continent, with renewed threats of violent extremism and also military coups. Climate change is creating new forms of displacement and threatening to derail development progress. COVID-19 has created risks of increased inequality and possible long-term socioeconomic reversals. In addition, we have the ongoing war in Ukraine, which is already having a negative impact on food security, for instance, and it could slow down economic growth and cause macroeconomic instability and also undermine peace across Africa. At the same time, UNDP is acutely aware of growing opportunities that prevail on the continent, which we must not lose sight of. These contribute to transformation, from the continent's young, dynamic, and talented population to the advantages that we have in the fourth industrial revolution, to the emergence of the AFCFTA, which opens new avenues for regional integration. Given this landscape, no single actor can adequately address both the opportunities and the issues that prevail today on the continent. UNDP's partnership with the government of Japan is about helping to create space for a new partnership that puts Africans and African institutions in the driver's seat in the pursuit of development goals. It is a model of the constructive partnership that we need for transforming Africa's peace and development landscape. And UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa recently published a report that outlines our contributions to the development priorities of the African Union, with a focus on silencing the guns agenda. UNDP is also invested in supporting the AFCFTA Secretariat in ensuring the full implementation of the One Africa market. And UNDP's offer on digital technology further recognizes the need to leverage new opportunities and invest in the future of development. In UNDP, we call it the Africa Promise. Excellencies and distinguished participants. On political transitions and governance, Africa is dealing with various complex challenges. This past year alone, we have witnessed 5 military coups and an increase in disruptive transitions. This growing trend calls for a closer understanding of the drivers and the pathways to peaceful political transitions. In partnership with the African Union Commission, UNDP is seeking to establish an Africa transition facility that is grounded on evidence-based data to support inclusive transitions and equip countries with tools that could help prevent and respond to crisis. In the Sahel, our investment in a different approach to stabilization, one that responds to the challenges of governance, insecurity, rule of law, human security, and livelihoods, has been a notable success in the Lake Chad Basin. And based on these achievements, UNDP is now extending its support to the Lake Takagumo Authority to develop a stabilization strategy and also establish a regional stabilization mechanism that will support national authorities to respond to crises with key partners that include Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, please allow me to mention our new governance framework, a renewed approach to achieving transformative change. The framework places an emphasis on strengthening trust and the social contract between state and citizens. It calls for people-centered, human rights-based, inclusive, and participatory governance and peace-building systems. At UNDP, we leverage the strengths and capacities of regional actors, particularly those of the African Union and regional economic communities, to respond to these challenges and to take advantage of emerging opportunities to foster democracy, to consolidate peace, and to enhance economic development. Finally, through our partnerships with external actors, including those on the Ticad platform, UNDP is helping to create the necessary conditions for Africa's transformative development. This is how we can achieve the Africa we want and the Africa of Agenda 2060 today, and equally fulfill the aspirations of the Sustainable Development Goals in Agenda 2030, which ensures that human security can be attained for all individuals. I wish you all successful deliberations, and thanks for listening.
So, a new governance framework, an Africa promise, and more support, a better enabling environment for better governance across Africa. And the continent needs it with 5 coups in the last year. Madam Ahuna Eziakwana, Regional Director for Africa at the UNDP, co-organizer of today's event, thank you very much for that. You've got us started. let us continue with good energy. We're going to move to a goodwill message by Mr. Jun Shimi, representative of the government of Japan, ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary for the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, Ticad, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Mr. Shimi-jun, please, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bose, and thank you to UNDP and ISS for organizing this ahead of almost 30 years ago, UNDP and other international partners, as its title says, Ticad is originally the forum to discuss, enhance, and materialize African development. But the more we proceed the Ticad process, the more we come to realize that peace and stability is one of the important agendas. Without sustainable peace and stability, there can be no further development in Africa. Addressing the root cause of conflict and terrorism, among other concerns, is indispensable for regional stability. A Ticad 7, which was held in Yokohama, Japan 2 years ago, strengthening peace and stability was regarded as one of the 3 pillars of the Ticad process. Next Ticad, namely Ticad 8, is going to be held in August this year. For the preparation of the Ticad 8, Japan held the Ticad ministerial meeting in the last weekend under the chair of Mr. Hayashi Yoshimasa, Japanese Foreign Ministry. Almost 40 minister-level high-ranking participants from Africa, international organization, and business society joined the meeting and then discussed peace and stability in Africa. In that meeting, African countries emphasized the importance of the democracy, the rule of law, capacity building in the field of peace building, and trust building with local communities as important factors for realizing regional peace and stability. At Ticad 7, Japan announced a new approach for peace and stability in Africa, saying NAPUSA. This is the approach addressing root causes that hamper peace and security in Africa, with respect for African ownership in conflict resolution. Japan has been promoting some specific projects under NAPUSA, such as human resources development in the field of criminal justice and border control. And this year, we have decided to finance $6.3 million to a new project in partnership with the UNDP to improve livelihood and support employment in Liptako. Yes, we are concerned about the signs of destabilization in Africa, especially in the Sahel region. To achieve medium and long-term stability in Africa, the consolidation of democracy and the rule of law plays a key role. Japan will support African-led efforts on the consolidation of democracy and the promotion of the rule of law through the implementation of transparent elections, institution building, and strengthened governance based on human security. Some African countries mentioned at the ministerial meeting, as I said, the importance of strengthening the foundation of local communities, engaging youth and women in the conflict prevention and resolution, and enhancing the humanitarian development peace nexus. In this regard, Japan has been supporting the prevention of the youth radicalization through so-called School for All project and vocational training. Ladies and gentlemen, as I told you, Japan will hold the Ticad 8 on 27 and 28 August this year. Japan continues to strongly support African-led development and will set out a pathway for African development looking ahead to the post-COVID-19 era. peace and stability in Africa will be one of the most important issues at the coming decade. And Japan is ready to strengthen international cooperation, utilizing Ticad aid through an opportunity like today's event. I'm looking forward to fruitful and thought-provoking discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Ambassador Jun Shimi, for that wonderful welcome and setting out the context of Japan's contribution to African peace, security, and development, the enabling environment, transparency. And of course, it's great to hear that preparations for Ticad 8 in August this year in Tunisia are well underway. So thank you very much for that. Let's move on now to our keynote presentation. And it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Fonte Akum, Executive Director of the Institute of Security Studies, which is co-organizer of today's event. A word about Dr. Akum before he starts. He's got a lot of experience. Previously, he headed the Lake Chad Basin Program in the ISS Regional Office for West Africa, the Sahel, and the Lake Chad Basin, based in Dakar, Senegal. And before joining the ISS in 2017, he worked for the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, the African Program of the United Nations University for Peace at the IMF, and Dr. Fonte Akum has researched and published on violence, governance, and human security in transitional contexts. Dr. Akum, you have 15 minutes and we are waiting hungrily for your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists, guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols respected. I would like to thank the government of Japan and the United Nations Development Program for inviting the ISS as a knowledge partner in co-organizing this event. It's an honor and a pleasure to present the keynote, of course, on this joint side event on the theme of peace, governance, and development in Africa, following the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD's ministerial meeting. Since 1993, Ticad has set itself the objective to work in partnership to improve social and economic conditions in Africa. And for 31 years, the Institute for Security Studies has worked to advance human security and development in Africa through evidence-based research to inform policy, technical assistance, strategic convening platforms on policy dialogue processes, and capacity building. And we would also like to acknowledge, through parts of this journey, support from the government of Japan. Taking the floor for this particular keynote within the current global context, I was compelled to speak to the issue of governing uncertainty, specifically looking at managing transitions, marginality, and informality in Africa. I think it is important to set the context very briefly. Although direct health threats posed by COVID-19 have remained particularly benign and relatively so in Africa, violent conflicts and unstable governance remain stellar challenges, as have been articulated by the previous speakers. However, as vulnerability accelerators, their correlates exacerbate horizontal and vertical inequalities, casting a dark pall of uncertainty over future trends and scenarios that point to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, remaining rather elusive. This, even if prospects remain on course and with corrections, of course, could portend well for Agenda 2063 to deliver on the integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa we want. Now, the nature of the evolution of COVID-19, violent conflict and governance instability, introduced deep uncertainty in Africa, and the management of these phenomena have proven thorny even for multilateral systems that for years have proven adept at managing crisis. And even if the prevention dimension has often resisted results-based programming and implementation across multiple sectors and scale. What do enduring violent conflicts, whether at the local, national, regional, and even across regional levels, COVID-19 related socioeconomic challenges, and governance instability relating to unconstitutional changes of government tell us about building peace, substantive democratic governance, and transformative development in Africa? That is the key question. Through the prism of governing complexity in response to stubborn public policy problems in Africa, I would like to share 3 key reflections informed by past and ongoing ISS evidence-informed policy analysis in and on the continent. The first reflection is about the nature of the complexities, that is, their form and composition, which determines how these complexities manifest themselves and react to policy interventions. Managing the implications of COVID-19, insurgent violence, or governance instability implies dealing with phenomena which are variant. I'm sure we have heard of the multiple variants of COVID-19. These phenomena are dynamic. I'm sure we are acquainted with the dynamics of insurgent violence, and they are self-sustainingly adaptive with global connections, and they anchor themselves in the longue durée. So the challenges actually find a way of sustaining and perpetuating themselves. While we could unpack these in so many different ways, I would like here to underscore that in order to master the nature of complexity, there's the need for a deep knowledge, understanding, and respect for local environments by practitioners, and to understand how stakeholders within this context perceive their positionality in the world. This understanding is key to policy interventions and programming to deal with this phenomenon. The second notion I would like to reflect on is transitional complexity. While transitions are necessary formative pathways to new orders, they can also be messy and uncertain. However, they are often fraught with plenty of opportunity. Africa is in the midst of multiple possible opportunity-replete transitions. The first is demographic. Africa is a young continent with close to 1 billion of its 1.4 billion inhabitants under the age of 35. Let's pack that issue. Africa stands to gain from a just energy transition, despite being disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change while being a minimal carbon emitter. Second transition. The third transition that Africa is confronted with is political. Unconstitutional changes of government raise important questions, not only about managing transitions back to constitutional order, but also more broadly about the consolidation of substantive democratic accountability and governance on the continent. Third and fourth transition is economic. The economic impact of COVID-19 pushed a lot of African countries into their first recession in 25 years. With the lingering impacts of COVID, it would take both time and decisive fiscal interventions to effectively manage this complex recovery from COVID to robust economies. These are all complex and interconnected transitions which necessitate policy choices, very difficult policy choices within very short political windows. More importantly, the goalposts or the expected outcomes of interventions aimed at dealing with these transitions need to be clearly identified and communicated from the onset. The final notion I would like to underscore is managing geographical complexity. Data from the continent point to urban protests and borderland insurgencies by different kinds of non-state armed groups as key features of violence and instability in Africa. While political accommodation often temporarily attenuates and postpones urban protests, insurgencies like those that we have seen in the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin straddle borders and endure, and they find in themselves the capacity to adapt based on the ways in which they prey on community. Now, what do these mean for governance, peace, and development? The first implication is about managing expectations in problem solving. We set up ambitious agendas, as should be the case. However, regardless of how accurate the assessment of the problem, the perfect public policy response on paper almost never achieves perfect outcomes on the ground. Intervening transitional, marginal, and informal variables often add flux to policy interventions. Therefore, there is the need to take this into account while planning non-linearity and flexibility into interventions. The second implication relates to inclusivity, particularly pertaining to gender and youth. There is the need to dismantle sustained architectures of symbolic violence towards gender and youth marginality on this continent. Strides have been made, of course, for youth inclusion on agendas and around the decision-making table. However, as the youngest continent on the planet, more substantive youth leadership in governance today and not in the future, inclusion and participation beyond just art and culture, but into politics itself, are vital for our continent. Because, in fact, these 1 billion group in Africa needs to be part of the decisions that are being taken on the continent. The question often crosses the mind. What if Africa led the revolution of women leadership across all sectors, private and public, profit and non-profit? We need to think beyond leadership, and there needs to be a holistic incentivization within Africa's differentiated sociopolitical infrastructures for women's self-actualization. This could unlock the potential, the full potential of 50% of Africa's population. For all these to occur, the third implication is one of political will as an X factor. Within peace, government, and development context, everyone talks about political will, political capacity, political propensity to deliver an effective action. However, political will is extremely challenging to factor into policy equations determined by narrow electoral windows. This is particularly the case in countries where there is a dissonance between public demand and support for effective democracy and the willing supply of regular elections in response to that. And these elections are often cloaked in contested legitimation. The interplay of peace, governance, and development amid complexity have implications for the identification of multidimensional solutions to these problems. The imperative of non-linearity is key. And in conclusion, the operationalization of a whole of society approach to problem solving in peace, governance, and development would contribute to promoting inclusiveness and social cohesion for effective problem solving. That is one, locally owned. Secondly, locally driven. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dr. Akum. Delighted to get your presentation. You covered a wide range of areas and you've given our speakers food for thought. And let's see how they build on what you've said in their own contributions. And if our audience are delegates tuning in from around the world, all 600 or so of them, want to respond or build on anything you've said, they can also do so by using the chat box, and we will try and find time in our program to respond to what you have to say about Dr. Akum's presentation or anything else you hear over the next 80 or so minutes. So, Dr. Fonte Akum, thank you very much for getting us meaningfully on our way. It's now time to move into the panel session, which will run for, as I say, around 80 minutes. We have 4 speakers, not the published 5, and they are Ambassador Fred Ngogo Gatesere, head of the Conflict Prevention and Early Warning Division of the African Union Commission, Ms. Nerina Kiplagat, who's currently working as a regional peace-building advisor at the UNDP's Regional Service for Africa. She's a late replacement for Dr. Rosalind Akombe, the team leader at Governance and Peacebuilding at the UNDP. We have Paul Simon Handy, Dr. Paul Simon Handy, Regional Director, East Africa at the ISS, and Ms. Nagat Suleiman Ahmed Osman, Program Officer at Search for Common Ground, East Central and East Africa Program. She's working out of the Sudan office. Dr. Bakary Sambe, Director of the Timbuktu Institute, will unfortunately not be able to participate today, but our other speakers will work to cover his area of expertise, which include radicalisms and religious conflict, particularly across the Sahel. So we've got several aims for this session, and they are to analyze the state of governance, peace, and security in Africa since the onset of COVID-19, to have a holistic conversation on peace, governance, and development in Africa, including the link between development and conflict. We want to identify entry points for scaling up investment in peace, governance, and development, especially in local communities in support of youth and women, as Dr. Fonte was saying. And we want to engage all stakeholders within the larger peace, governance, and development nexus, and their assessment of the tools currently used for peace building and conflict prevention. So to our first panelist, Ambassador Fred Ngogo Kataritzi, so head of conflict prevention and early warning division at the African Union Commission. A bit about his background. Ambassador Ngogo, before joining this division, served as a senior officer within the African Union Mission in Somalia, where he assisted operational teams from the military, civilian, and police components to provide support on counterterrorism and in the planning of military operations in line with AMISOM's mandate. So he has real experience on the ground, on the front line. Ambassador Ngogo, please introduce your experience in peace and governance and development, in 2 to 3 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Greetings from Addis Ababa. First of all, it's always difficult to speak after Fonte, Dr. Fonte Akum. So I'll try to make my presentation very, very short. You started by talking about my experience with regards to peace and governance. I would say that I started actually with peace enforcement when we deployed in Somalia, and there what we had to do was to create an environment that would allow the Somalis to have a conversation about the ills of their society. So this involved actually, to be part of a mission which was actively engaged, not even in peacekeeping, in peace enforcement operations. And we successfully did that. But one of the things that we learned in the process is that the military is only 10% of the effort that needs to be put in, and the majority of it actually is political. So 90% is really the political work that you have to do for you to be successful in whatever you're trying to do. And the second thing that we learned was the importance of partnerships. When you are about to bring about peace in a country, it is important to really have strong and solid partnerships, because it's not something that you can do on your own. And most importantly, these partnerships, they need to be well coordinated. Everybody likes to talk about coordination, but no one wants to be coordinated. But but this is something that we have learned. The other aspect that I've learned is understanding really the root causes, what are the drivers of conflict in a given country. Yes, there are certain aspects that are common to many countries in the world, but sometimes there are also very deeply rooted issues that actually needs to be addressed and to understand the society in which you're operating in. I will just give you an example with regards to, for example, to Somalia. There was one saying which troubled me while I was operating there. They used to say that if a mountain falls on you, your clan can lift the mountain off of you. But if your clan falls on you, only Allah can save you. And that saying really intrigued me, but what it demonstrated the importance of clan in that particular society, or tribalism in any other society in Africa, and the importance that plays in our daily lives, and how it can be a force for good or it can be a force for bad. So that's with regards to the part about the peace support operations. I could have talked about financing as well, which is a major challenge, but I will not go into that because that's a whole debate in itself. Then I had the opportunity to now do conflict prevention. As you mentioned, you're introducing me. Now I'm actually in the Office of the Commissioner for Political Affairs, where I'm a senior advisor advising on partnerships and then also issues related to a border program and regional security mechanism. But before that, head of conflict prevention. And I can tell you one thing, one of the challenges that we have is when it comes to conflict prevention, most people think that you intervene when things are on BBC. But the reality is that by the time the issues are on BBC or in the other news, you're already in a crisis mode. And one of the things that we have discovered was the difficulties for countries to accept anyone coming to assist them because they feel that it's interference into an internal matter, and that is quite difficult to convince them. So we've had to become creative in terms of how we approach conflict prevention and tackling it from a governance perspective. Meaning what? Meaning that if you come to a member state and say, I want to strengthen your institutions so that they are the ones to be able to respond, then you're luckier. They tend to listen more. But if you're going to touch on issues related, for example, to changes to their constitution or extension of term limits and things like that, they will keep you away. But if you begin early enough and help them to strengthen their institutions to be the first responders, then you have better luck. The other thing that I have learned with regards to governance and conflict prevention is the importance of, we often have too many cooks in the kitchen, but I always like to say, I don't mind many cooks in the kitchen so long as there's a chef. I think, I think it's extremely important because otherwise it goes in all sorts of directions. Yeah. And I would like to hear, again, the importance also of the last point on this issue. It's the importance of understanding and being humble. You are not there to resolve the problems of that country. And I think all of us in multilateral organizations, we tend to kind of think that we're saving the world, but no, we're not there to do that. We're there to create an environment so that the locals can be able to really address their own issues. It's extremely important to understand that. Otherwise, you will suffer from what we call in our jargon, clientitis, where you go to work on a country and then you become part of the problem. So this is something that is extremely important. Last but not least,
Ambassador, you've gone way over your time. You've been fascinating, engaging, and dynamic, and I could really listen to you all day, and I'm sure our colleagues could as well. However, that's okay because you've given us some great metaphors. You've really crystallized powerfully the experience that you've acquired in your areas of work, and also, I should say, as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Burundi. Some of those metaphors, I mean, if the mountain falls on you, your clan can lift it from you. If the clan falls on you, only Allah can save you. I will not forget that. It's really powerful, and I will use it myself. I will use it in the future. So thank you very much. We'll come back to you, and you'll be able to flesh out some of those points you didn't get to a little bit later on. But let's move now to another introduction. And our next speaker comes from the UNDP, and she's Ms. Nerina Kiplagat, currently working at the UNDP's Regional Service Center for Africa as a Regional Peacebuilding Advisor. And Ms. Kiplagat previously worked in UNDP Tanzania, UNDP's Bureau of Policy and Program Support, the Bureau of Crisis Prevention and Recovery, and UNDP Kenya. Range of expertise, issues involving elections, violence prevention, transitional justice, infrastructures for peace, youth and peace building, response to violent extremism. A lot of experience, but we want you to boil it down to just a few minutes, as Ambassador Ungo did, so that we can work and move the discussion along. But over to you, Madam Kiplagat.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much, to the organizers for including me in this panel. And really picking up, from where Ambassador Fred left off. And, I'd like to just give a few reflections in terms of the link between conflict and development. We have seen, and, as Ambassador Fred mentioned, we shouldn't just address conflict when it is visible. It really needs to be fully integrated, peace building, conflict prevention within governance and within development. We see this, for example, by including the political context in development policies and practice in conflict-affected fragile states, and by addressing the structural causes of conflict. When we looked at the structural issues, and we note that, for example, in peace agreements, those that only deal with the cessation of violence but not looking at the underlying causes tend to have a relapse into conflict. So it's really important, and an example is the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation Agreements of 2008 following the post-election violence. And Agenda Item 4 really looking at core issues around land, for example, youth inclusion, gender parity, looking at transitional justice and past grievances. Another good example is looking at the UN Secretary General's Action Plan on Prevention of Violent Extremism from 2016 that really talks about having a development approach to complement the security responses, which are not sufficient on their own to really address violent extremism, as it touches on, let's say, the flowers or the fruit of the manifestation of the problem, but not really going to the underlying causes and drivers. And when you look at the implementation of this development approach, it's looking at the policy level, institutional capacity building, community resilience, and really heavily based on this research and informed approaches. And again, going back to the context specificity and having these tailor-made informed approaches to address conflict broadly. For UNDP, we really look at more inclusive and sustainable development as conflict prevention and peace-building strategy and approach, and trying to support, be it at the regional level or the national level, tailor-made approaches, strengthening national capacities on social cohesion, infrastructures for peace, dialogue and mediation processes, so addressing the conflict components, but with very much of a long-term view, and as mentioned before, also addressing the structural causes or looking ahead at risks such as climate-related risks. In terms of our footprint on development programming, I just wanted to end with just giving a few examples, when I'm talking about the humanitarian development peace nexus or the integration of approaches. In the Sahel, we have a Sahel Youth Eco Brigade, which is part of the youth offer for the Sahel, and it has a special emphasis on livelihoods and conflict prevention, and being implemented in cross-border areas between Niger, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And when we do work in terms of the livelihoods or economic empowerment, I also want to emphasize the importance of measurement. So it's not just looking at the opportunities that are provided, but what are the perceptions? Are there behavioral changes? Are there reductions in risks? Do the youth feel they have a future? And, more of these subtle elements of measurement are very important, and not just, looking at the peace dividends, but specifically the link to address peace writ large. The second example is stabilization. We are really looking at contextualized stabilization responses. As has been mentioned by the previous speakers, looking at the work in the Lake Chad Basin region or Liptako Gorma, and looking at, not only the development aspects, the livelihood opportunities, trust building, civil military dialogues that are there, engaging with civil society network on reintegration. So looking at, also having this whole of society approach, looking at issues of communication and messages to really build trust between, government and people, and having more of this inclusive approach. Finally, as has been, mentioned before in terms of the work on transitions, and in Mali, UNDP is supporting the promotion of an inclusive and accountable governance, state building, and decentralization for improved basic services, and also providing electoral support. To just conclude, on that in, these few minutes, is really the need is for responses to be multidimensional and to include all sectors of society and ensure these are interlinked. And this we see very clearly reflected in the nature of the Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030, that really emphasizes that all SDGs are interconnected, and hence the importance of integrated responses, which are key to helping restore a robust social contract between the state and its people, which is an essential foundation for durable peace and sustainable development. Thank you.
Madam Kiplagat, thank you very much indeed for that stirring and detailed introduction. I was scribbling away my notes furiously, as I did with our ambassador previously, and a number of things jumped out. Obviously, there was the metaphor. I like that. Don't wait for the flowers or the fruits. Go down to the roots beforehand. That's where you will see the source of the problem. The multidimensional approach, very, very important. I like the detail, the importance of that particular Sahel Youth Eco Brigade. Brigade is a military term, but you have marshaled an army of youth to work on eco issues. Very, very important, and especially this area that's often neglected: Niger, Nigeria, Burkina, and Mali. So great, thank you very much. You picked up the baton, took it safely through to the next leg, and now you're going to hand the baton on to our next speaker, Dr. Paul Simon Handy, who is Regional Director for East Africa at the ISS, co-organizer of today's event, of course, alongside UNDP. Now, Dr. Handy initially joined the ISS in 2007 and served as various research and management functions, including Deputy Executive Director and Research Director. But he's also served for 5 years in the United Nations Panel of Experts on the Central African Republic before rejoining the ISS in 2019. And Paul Simon has extensive experience in policy analysis, strategy development, and conflict prevention. Dr. Handy, please give us an introduction. Tell us more about your experience in peace, governance, and development. Over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. And let me thank our co-organizing institution, UNDP, and of course, the government of Japan for allowing us to partner with them for these events. Mr. Moderator, very difficult to talk about oneself, actually. I think you did a great job in presenting my modest person.
Feel free.
Yeah, no, just a few things. As you say, I'm a researcher, I'm a policy advisor. I've been practitioner also within the UN system. And from time to time, I confuse some students in my lectures at various universities. So 25 years of experience working exactly at the intersection between peace, governance, and development, trying to understand the relationships between these three, actually, that I see as a continuum. And maybe, because it's just an introduction, we'll have time to get into more substance. 3 lessons that I've learned. The first is one lesson that my colleague, Dr. Akum, mentioned is actually also humility. Those years of experience have taught me humility. We need to be humble in the face of the major challenges we are facing. But the first lesson is really context matters. Context matters a lot, and we see now in addressing violent extremism in various contexts, in the Sahel, in East Africa, and in Central Africa, in the Lake Chad Basin, and increasingly so even in Southern Africa, we see that context matters. The way we address violent extremism in the Sahel cannot be the same way in East Africa, sometimes even within one country, as Niger has indicated. The way we deal, the way even violent extremism manifests itself in the West is completely different of what we see in the East, due to the changing context of this, we must admit, wide country. So context matters, but also, and this is the second lesson, deeper understanding of dynamics should actually inform policy, not the other way around. Very often, practitioners tour the world with ready-made solutions in search of problems, actually. It should be the other way around. We need to understand. We can only achieve peace if we understand what drives insecurity and instability. We've said it a number of times. We all agree on that, but somehow institutional habits seem to actually favor rather having ready-made solutions that we try to implement everywhere. The other thing, and I think this is the last point, the other speakers also mentioned that, conflict prevention. In reality, we all agree that conflict prevention is cheaper, is more effective, and so on and so forth. But we struggle actually to do conflict prevention because it's extremely difficult to get political will to support conflict prevention. Remember, conflict prevention, when you are successful, when you successfully do conflict prevention, nothing happens actually. So how do they know you've been successful doing conflict prevention? So this is one challenge that we should all address, to mobilize more resources into conflict prevention that is definitely cheaper than conflict management. But somehow there too, old institutional habits seem to be wanting to rather favor conflict management because it's more visible, you get more political credit in engaging when a conflict has erupted than before it has erupted. Mr. Moderator, I'm also a scholar, and as a scholar, we try to respect time. Thank you.
Very good. Dr. Handy, thank you very much. You boiled 25 years of experience on the front line and also institutions into just 5 minutes. So thank you very much, and we'll definitely come back to you there. Again, I was scribbling furiously. Yes, got to be humble. All of you have said this. You've got to be humble. You can't parachute in with solutions from outside. The dynamics should inform policy and not vice versa. Political will is key. Prevention is better than cure. It's a lot cheaper, even if you can't see the results immediately compared to when a crisis erupts. Thank you very much. And now let us finally invite our fourth speaker, Ms. Nagat Suleiman Ahmed Osman, Program Officer at Search for Common Ground, the Central and East Africa program. So she works out of the Sudan office. And Nagat is a proactive youth peace builder with, there she is, over 5 years of experience co-creating peaceful realities with local communities. She also has been facilitating non-adversarial dialogue in conflict-affected areas across Sudan, and she currently functions as Program Officer with Search for Common Ground, managing a diverse range of projects that seek to elevate women's lives, voices, and political participation in periphery states through economic empowerment, capacity building, and networking. So she's doing a lot. Ms. Osman, you're going to speak in Arabic. We'd like to hear more about your experience in peace, governance, and development. It's over to you.
سأتبع نفس النهج الذي ذكره أستاذ هاندي. مستر هنري، لقد قلت ما يكفي من تجربتي في مجال بناء السلام، فسأكتفي بذلك وأحاول الدخول في موضوع النقاش وأشارك تجربة واقعية في مجال بناء السلام في السودان تحديداً، مع بعض التعريج على النماذج في دول أفريقية مجاورة. اسمحوا لي في البداية
Well, let us see if we can persevere. I mean, she's in the Sudan office. So we will wait and give her a bit of time. And there, you're back. Yes, thank you, Nagati. You are back with us. Please continue.
ما هي آخر نقطة سمعتموها؟
Yes.
حسناً. اسمحوا لي بأن أبدأ حديثي بمقولة يتبناها أعضاء الشبكة المتحدة لبناة السلام الشباب، وهي تقول: إذا أردنا الالتزام بمبدأ أن أكثر المتأثرين بمشكلة معينة يجب أن يتولوا زمام الأمور في حلها، إذن فالرؤساء وموقعي اتفاقيات السلام والمفاوضين.
That's okay. We want to try and persevere because it's very, very important to have your voice. So we'll pursue, we will wait for a moment or two to see if the connection can be reestablished. If not, we will circle back to our other presenters and then Now, Nigati, you're back with us. You were telling us that it was very important to engage with the people who are most affected. So please continue from there.
أوكي. شكرا جزيلا الأستاذ هنري. أريد التحدث ومشاركة تجربة بسيطة عن ما هي الأدوار التي يمكن أن يلعبها الشباب والنساء في بناء السلام في السودان أو في القارة الأفريقية وفي الدول التي تعيش ظروف مشابهة. في الحقيقة سأستند على الكلام الذي ذكره السيد فريدريك حول أننا عاملين في مجال بناء السلام حينما نبدأ بالتدخل في دول معينة لإحداث السلام علينا فقط العمل على إنتاج الظروف المواتية. وإذا كنا نتوقع من النساء والشباب أن يقوموا بأدوار فاعلة فعلينا توفير هذه الظروف. من الأدوار التي يمكن والتي يستطيع أن يلعبها الشباب والنساء في بناء السلام هي قيادة التغيير. وبقيادة التغيير أنا أتحدث هنا عن المبادرة بقيادة التغيير، أي أن يكونوا هم الفاعلين الأساسيين أو أن يبدأوا الجهود وأن يبدأوا البحث عن كيفية إشراكهم وعن كيفية مناصرة قضاياهم في مجال بناء السلام. أيضاً أتحدث عن أن الشباب والنساء يمكن أن يساهموا في بناء السلام عن طريق تعزيز المناهج والوسائل اللا عنفية أو وسائل اللا عنف. فجميعنا يعلم أننا نعيش في القارة الأفريقية التي قد أنهكتها الحروب والتي يتعامل فيها المواطنين الأفارقة والحكومات الأفريقية بالعنف كواحد من المقدمة لحل النزاعات. إذن للنساء والشباب القدرة والفرصة على أن يقوموا بتعزيز المناهج اللا عنفية. من هذه النقطة أيضاً أود الانتقال والإشارة إلى تجربتي كعاملة في بناء السلام وكامرأة وكذلك كشابة أو كما أعتبر نفسي شابة، بتسليط الضوء على بعض التحديات التي تواجه النساء والشباب في مجال بناء السلام. التحدي الأول يمكن أن أعتبره هو التقليل من مجال السلام أو من أهمية مجال بناء السلام كمجال قائم بذاته. وأنا في هذه النقطة لا أتعارض مع السيدة كبلغات والتي ذكرت بضرورة التكاملية ما بين مجال بناء السلام ومجال الحوكمة الرشيدة وكذلك التنمية، ولكني أتحدث عن ضرورة زيادة تسليط الضوء ودعم مجال بناء السلام كمجال منفصل ناحية توفير البرامج المتخصصة فقط لبناء السلام. بالضرورة نحن نحتاج لهذه التكاملية بين هذه المجالات الثلاث، ولكن هنا أتحدث عن تسليط الضوء بصورة أكبر. ثانياً، واحدة من التحديات التي تواجه مشاركة النساء والشباب في عمليات بناء السلام والتحول الديمقراطي والتنمية كنتيجة حتمية هي عدم التمييز ما بين المشاركة والتمثيل. فعندما نتحدث عن إدماج النساء وزيادة نسبتهم في المشاركة، وهنا أنا أقول بأن وجود نسبة معينة من النساء أو نسبة معينة من الشباب في مواقع اتخاذ القرار هو مهم، ولكنه ليس كافي إذا لم يكن ممثلا للشرائح المختلفة للنساء والشباب. فنعلم أن النساء ليست مجموعة متجانسة وكذلك الشباب، فلكل النساء في منطقة معينة وحتى داخل البلد الواحد احتياجات مختلفة. فنساء المدن إذا كان على فرص عمل ووظائف، فالنساء في الريف مثلا تكون مشاكلهم متعلقة بعدم قدرتهم على تملك الأراضي أو الأصول الإنتاجية. إذا نحن نتكلم عن حتى النساء نفسهم ليسوا شريحة متجانسة. فعندما نتكلم عن إدماج النساء في عمليات بناء السلام والوصول عن قرار، علينا أن نتأكد من أنهم ممثلين تماما وليسوا مشاركين فقط بنسب أو كوتا معينة. التحدي الأخير الذي عايشته من واقع تجربتي وهو التعامل بصورة فوقية من الممارسين أو العاملين في مجال بناء السلام حينما يودون تبسيط أو تنفيذ الأطر القانونية والاتفاقيات والقرارات الدولية الخاصة بمجال بناء السلام. تكون بصورة معقدة ولا تتماشى مع السياقات المحلية بالضرورة. أنا هنا لا أتكلم عن الطريقة التي تمت بها صياغة هذه القوانين مرضية، ولكني أتحدث عن مرحلة التنفيذ، المرحلة التي نقوم بتبسيط هذه المفاهيم وتنفيذها على أرض الواقع. يجب أن نتحلى فيها بفهم عميق للسياق، وهذه النقطة تم ذكرها قبل قليل من الدكتور أكوم، أريد فقط التذكير عليها. إذا تبقى وقت سأتحدث قليلا عن الفرص.
Yes, I'll give you a bit more time. I'll give you a bit more time because your screen froze. So please, Madam Osman. Your screen is froze. Yes, please. Yeah, I'll give you one more minute. One more minute.
أوكي. أريد أيضا التعريج على بعض الفرص الموجودة للنساء والشباب في مجال بناء السلام. وأول فرصة هي أن رحلة بناء السلام قد ابتدأت بالفعل. إذا نحن لا نبدأ من الصفر لإشراك النساء والإشراك الشباب، لسنا في مرحلة صفرية. هنالك جهود تمت على مستوى الدول محليا، وهنالك جهود إقليمية، هنالك تمت. إذا هذه الجهود تعتبر فرصة لمزيد من إدماج النساء والشباب في عمليات بناء السلام. النقطة الثانية والأخيرة التي أود الحديث عنها هي أن الشباب هم شريحة محايدة، وأنا هنا أتعارض مع القول الذي يقول الشباب هم سلميون بطبعهم. الشباب ليسوا سلميين بطبعهم، وكذلك ليسوا عنيفين بطبعهم. هم فقط يستجيبون للسياسات المتوفرة ويستجيبون للجهود التي تقوم من حولهم. وأكبر دليل على ذلك أن جماعات التطرف العنيف مثلا من أكبر المستقطبين فيها هم الشباب. إذا كما أننا نعتبر الشباب هم بناة للسلام، يجب أن نعتبرهم أيضا أدوات يمكن استخدامها في الحروب.
Thank you very much indeed for now, Madam Osman. That was a wonderful, stirring initial presentation. Thank you very much. So we've heard from our four speakers. They've all talked about their experience in peace, governance, and development. We're going to circle back, and then we will pursue the next agenda in our discussion. But for now, I want to circle back to Ambassador Ngoga, and I'm going to ask you about geopolitical tensions and peace building, because this could be another bottleneck to peace resolution in the continent. So Ambassador Ngoga, from your experience, how difficult can it be to build peace when there are geopolitical tensions in the area? Ambassador Ngoga. Let's see if we can reach out to you. I believe you're in Addis, Ambassador Ngoga. Let's see if we can pick up on where we were leaving off. Ambassador Ngoga, can you rejoin us, please? Aha, we seem to be having some difficulties with Ambassador Ngoga's connection. So perhaps we will circle back to one of our other discussants. Let's say bring Dr. Handy back into our discussion. Would you like to handle that area of geopolitical tension? And then we will move on to the next phase of our discussion, where we analyze the status, analyze where we are at the moment. Dr. Handy.
Yes, thank you. And sorry for that technical issue. Geopolitical tensions. Geopolitical tensions have always, or let's say the geopolitical context is a key factor in peace building, whether in terms of tensions or in terms of cooperative engagement. But peace building is also about world views, is also about how to govern societies, and we know there are diverging views about that. The real question is really, I mean, there are lots of tensions about what is the right way of helping societies out of poverty. How do we deal properly with structural imbalances and inequalities within societies? There are diverging views about that. But as I was saying earlier, it's less about templates than actually about understanding the real social conditions in each context. Templates are great. They might have worked in other contexts, but what is important for African societies is to understand what is the path that is more useful for every country. And there too, I won't generalize. I wouldn't talk about Africa as a one place. As Africa is comprised of several countries, and sometimes in one country we might need to have to require different solutions. But in reality, when I look at the experience we've had in the last 30 years, particularly, what I see is, it might be a bit controversial, but what I see is a crisis of solutions. Yeah. We are in the midst of, we see violence, conflict is actually picking up again. But I'm not completely stressed about that, because these are the teething ills of state building. African countries are very young. African states are very young. 60 years is relatively young in the history, if you take the bigger picture, in the history of a society. So African countries are young, and state building has never been a linear process and a peaceful process. Nowhere in the world has state building actually been completely peaceful. And very often it has actually been very violent and war-torn even. And it's not linear, it's not necessarily always predictable, but so I see the recent peak in in fatalities in Africa, in violence, and in conflict, as in the bigger, being considered in the bigger context of state building.
Yes, yes.
But on the other side, I also see, as I was saying, a crisis of international solutions to address those crises. We actually keep repeating the same things, wondering and hoping to get different results. This is a general critique, and I'm also criticizing policy research organizations like mine and practitioners. We are kind of, we need more innovation in better addressing in the long term. We tend too much to consider everything in the short term of 4 to 5 periods because of budget cycles, because of project cycles, but life doesn't happen in those electoral periods. So we have to take into account the longer time frame and insert our solutions within this time frame, and lesser so in smaller and shorter time frames, as we generally do in our project management.
Excellent, Dr. Handy. Thank you for that. You're being very, very, very honest when you assess where the problems are, especially when it comes to the lack of innovation, probably at the government level, at the think tank level, at the multilateral level. Meanwhile, violent extremism persists in the Sahel region. It's appearing in other regions, for example, Mozambique. The question then is how we can reduce this trend in Africa. We're going to talk about the issue of inequalities, which is a driver, and I'll hear from Madame Kiplagat and Osman on that. But from your point of view, reducing this trend, how on earth can we do it? Because a lot of people who are Afro-optimists, who believed in the Africa Rising theme of a few years ago, are now becoming a lot more pessimistic. Back to you, Dr. Handy. Yes.
Oh, I might have sounded pessimistic, but I'm actually quite optimistic. Again, if you take the longer time frame, there's actually a lot of grounds to be quite optimistic. Remember the transitions that my colleague Dr. Akum mentioned. The main transition, because I think we have to look at structural factors if we would like to understand better why violent extremism seems to be entrenched, while certain type of conflicts, why coup d'etat re-emerge, although when we look at if we look at the time frame of 40 years, we actually see a decrease of coup d'etat. Actually, we get upset when there are 4, 5 coup d'etat in 1 year. I mean, I know that 20 years ago, it would have been business as usual. So I'm optimistic because if you look at the most fundamentals, the structural factors, Africa is actually doing well. Africa is improving. Africa is not actually failing, even in critical areas like governance. In terms of inclusion, in terms of participation, in terms of also we are all aware of democratic governance, the demand by African people, as just indicated by studies from Afrobarometer. African citizens, contrary to what happens in other parts of the world, actually request more democracy than they actually get from the government. So the demand for democracy is high, while at the same time supply remains low, relatively low. So when we look at those structural factors, what I see is actually a progression. There are challenges, of course. Challenges are ahead. One of them is demography. And when I talk about demography, I'm not one of those saying that demography, Africa's youth bulge is a bomb and so on and so forth. It doesn't mean anything. Africa is currently underpopulated, not overpopulated. What is the biggest challenge regarding Africa's population is the pace. is the rhythm, is the way in which in the time of 25 years, population doubles in some countries. How to manage that is a governance challenge than anything else.
Okay.
Thank you, Madrid.
Dr. Handy, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting what you said about the Afrobarometer surveys. Africans want more democracy than they get. In some parts of the world, people are tired of democracy. They even want a strongman, as one of the surveys toward the end of the Trump administration revealed. People said, well, what's wrong with a strongman? Well, those of us who've lived under strongman might beg to differ. Thank you very much indeed for that. Demography, yes, very important. So let me bounce back to Madame Kiplagat from the UNDP and the issue of inequalities, because when you have very rapid population increase, then the inequalities that you already have can be exacerbated. So how are inequalities making political and socio-economic divisions worse? And what about the impact of inequalities, sometimes driven by population increase, on peace and development? Madam Kiplagat, let's talk about inequalities.
Thank you very much. So I would like to start, with citing some reports. And according to the UN World Social Report 2020, inequality in a rapidly changing world highlights that countries where inequality has grown are home to more than 2/3, which is 71% of the world's population. The second report which I want to refer to is the 2020 Africa Sustainable Development Report towards Recovery and Sustainable Development in the Decade of Action. And it indicated that at the end of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and intensified inequalities as well as discrimination. As I had started off, talking about, more of this holistic approach in terms of looking at issues of conflict prevention, I want to draw from the SDGs report, focusing on some of the pillars in terms of people, prosperity, planet, and then zoning in on peace. So drawing from this report, looking at people, nearly 40% of all Africans are still living in extreme poverty, and there is persistent inequality despite sustained growth, which has pushed at least 27 African countries into the middle to high income status. Prosperity, economic growth measured by per capita income growth, has lagged behind real income growth in every sub-region of the continent for all 4 decades between 1980 and 2019. Looking at planet, the Environmental Performance Index, EPI, calculated the state ranking for 51 African states out of the 180 states surveyed. 33 African states south of the Sahara were among the bottom 50. And finally, to really zoning in on the peace aspects and impact, governance challenges affect peace as there has been a decline in democratic values, as we've heard, challenges in holding free and fair elections, unconstitutional changes of government. We've also seen human rights abuses, limits on participation of women and youth, corruption, disregard for rule of law, which have also hindered progress and fraying of the social contract. Within this context, we have seen that armed groups have really failed to heed the calls for global ceasefire, and violent extremist groups seem emboldened by the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. We've also seen the trend since the decline of ISIS in 2017 and the increase, as has been mentioned also by previous speakers, in terms of areas where violent extremism or radicalization towards violent extremism has increased in other pockets across the continent, and as mentioned, looking more now at Central Africa, Mozambique, and Southern Africa, as well as the West African littoral states that have increased risk. In the Global Terrorism Index of 2022, Sub-Saharan Africa emerges as the global epicenter of terrorism, with 48% of total global deaths from terrorism in Sub-Saharan Africa. So picking up, from that point, I just wanted to highlight some specific trends when we look at what we have framed as UNDP as journeys to extremism, and how the issue of inequality feeds into this. In 2017, we did a study on the journey to extremism and really trying to understand the process of being radicalized towards violent extremism and joining a group, and what were the factors that affected the choices made by these individuals. We have done a follow-up study, which will be released this year, and where we look not only at the journeys in, but just to also give a bit of hope, the journeys out of, and how effective prevention of violent extremism efforts, have been. But zoning in on, the issue of inequality, I just wanted to highlight particularly, some of the pull factors. We do see that economic factors remain a key driver of voluntary recruits to VE groups. Employment opportunities are the most frequently cited as the primary reason for joining. They are not the sole trigger. It's very important, to mention that. But we found about 25% of the voluntary recruits, which is the majority, do cite the economic factors. And maybe just to add to that, and when we look at the exits out, is that when you look at the income they receive, it is often less than the control group of people with a sort of similar profile in high-risk areas. And a lot of those who exit the group, it's an illusionment in terms of the expectations were not met. Where are they found? Predominantly in marginalized and borderland areas, and this goes back in terms of development planning and prioritization. How are the policies addressing these marginalized areas? The issues of real or perceived injustice. We found that in the first report that they cited the tipping point as the final trigger to join the group. 71% cited government action. And this really shows the fraying of the social contract between the people and the government. Interestingly enough, more recently, we're seeing also an increase in female recruits into the groups and more forced recruitment of children. More years of exposure to secular education is statistically significantly associated with a lower likelihood of voluntary recruitment. And again, that goes back, in terms of looking at education policies and access to education for all sectors of the population. And, one thing I wanted to highlight in terms of increased risk is when we look at issues of, frustration, marginalization, the speed is very fast, and it tends to be between 1 month to 1 year of joining. And we found that 40% of voluntary recruits joined within 1 month. So it is something, to keep in mind, in terms of policies, looking at fragility, looking at the widening gap and the fraying of the social contract. So just to close off, on that point is in terms of 2 points, to address it going forward, really the need to realign financing towards national development priorities and SDGs, using social protection, opportunities of digital connectivity, which we've seen have been accelerated due to COVID-19, and also looking at resilience as accelerators. A previous speaker talked about, the conflict analysis, and in the conflict analysis, we're not only looking at the conflict risk, but the protective factors, the resilience factors, and how can we further, work on those. And finally, really looking at leadership, which is really needed to ensure cooperation frameworks are grounded in the leave no one behind principles, to locate where there's inequality happening with granular data, as has been mentioned, and really having clear policies and approaches to address it. Thank you.
Madam Kiplagat, thank you very much indeed. You've foreshadowed our next session, which is really looking at best practice and way forward. And I know that some of our listeners, our viewers, are very keen and very interested, and they've been sending in questions, and we'll try and pick up 1 or 2 of those questions as we approach the final half hour of our session. But let me go to Ms. Osman to start us in this next session, or this next phase of our discussion, best practice and way forward. I'm wondering what your assessment is on the impact of approaches currently used for peace building and conflict prevention where you are. What gaps remain, especially when you look at youth, and you were talking earlier about inequality. Madam Osman, over to you, please.
وفي الجلسة السابقة ذكرت بعض التحديات والتي يمكن أن نعتبرها هي أيضا فراغات أو تقصير في عمل العاملين في مجال بناء السلام تجاه إشراك النساء والشباب. واحدة أو إحدى هذه الفراغات أو التقصير يمكن اعتباره في النقطة التي ذكرتها وهي التمثيل العادل وليس فقط اعتماد المشاركة. في الفترات السابقة كنا حريصين جدا على أن نزيد من نسبة مشاركة النساء ونسبة مشاركة الشباب، لكننا لم نكن حريصين على التركيز على من هم الشباب تحديدا الذين نستهدفهم بالمشاركة في بناء السلام أو الذين يتم تمكينهم توفر لديهم خدمات أو دعم تدريبي أو مالي أو غيره. إذن هذه ثغرة كبيرة. إحدى الثغرات التي يمكن أن نراها في ممارسة بناء السلام سواء كانت من منظمات مجتمع مدني محلية أو منظمات مجتمع مدني عالمية هي غياب عدسة الحساسية للنزاع أو ما يسمى بالconflict sensitivity. أحيانا تدفعنا نوايا وأجندات جيدة جدا لدعم بناء السلام في المناطق الأفريقية، ولكن نسبة لغياب عدسة حساسية النزاع نجدنا نخلق مزيد من الفروقات. مثلا يعني سأضرب مثالا بسيطا على ذلك، وهو في تدخلات بناء السلام في الفترة السابقة كانت كلها متعلقة فقط بتغيير مفاهيم الأفراد حول بناء السلام، لكنها تجاهلت أن هنالك ظروف موضوعية، ظروف مادية لها تأثير مباشر على موضوع بناء السلام، منها موضوع التمكين الاقتصادي. إذن فالمشاريع التي لم تكن مصحوبة بمشاريع أخرى مدرة للدخل أو بأنشطة متعلقة بالتأثير على سبل كسب العيش للنساء وللشباب لم تكن ذات قيمة كبيرة جدا في تحويل النزاعات في تلك المناطق. إذن هذه واحدة من الفقرات التي يجب أن ننتبه لها في ممارساتنا القادمة في مجال بناء السلام. كذلك التعامل مع النساء والشباب سابقا كان يتم على أنهم مستفيدين أو مشاركين في برامج بناء الشباب، ولم يتم التعامل معهم بصورة كبيرة أو في معظم الأوقات كشركاء. علينا أن نعتبرهم شركاء في مجال بناء السلام والتحول الديمقراطي والحوكمة الرشيدة. فحينما نتعامل مع النساء والشباب كشركاء وليسوا فقط مشاركين أو ممارسين، فإننا بالتالي سنزيد من ثقتهم بأنفسهم في التغيير أو في إحداث التغيير. هذا أولاً. ثانياً، حينما نعاملهم كشركاء فإننا سنعتبرهم جزء أصيل من عملية صناعة القرار، لأنهم شركاء في عملية معينة فسنهتم بإدماجهم وبإشراكهم في جميع عمليات صنع القرار وفي عمليات بناء السلام بمستوياتها المختلفة. إذن يمكن أن نعتبر إحدى الثغرات السابقة هي التعامل مع النساء والشباب كمستفيدين أو كمشاركين وليسوا كشركاء. شكرا جزيلا.
Madam Osman, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to circle back to Madam Kiplagat then, from the UNDP. What gaps have you identified when you look at the status of the current approaches used for peace building and conflict prevention? Do you agree with Madam Osman that we're talking about conflict sensitivity, the lack of problems with representation, and also treating people, women and youth, as participants instead of upgrading them to the level of partners?
Thank you very much. And indeed, picking up from the first point on conflict sensitivity, indeed, when we're looking at development planning or responses, having this conflict-sensitive approach can help inform not only reducing potential for conflict, but looking at peace-building gains and dividends. And if we have conflict sensitivity, better mainstreamed, I would say, not only in conflict context, and going back to this lens should always be there, it does deal with issues of, be it marginalization or unequal development practice and so on. In terms of youth and women, indeed, when we look at the youth peace and security agenda, the women peace and security agenda, for, particularly the former, there's still this very much of inviting to join, rather than looking at where are opportunities also for youth-led peace building. As UNDP, we have recently done a study and looking at the frameworks of the African Union, the RECs, looking at infrastructures for peace within countries and infrastructures for peace, referring to capacities for peace, be they formal or informal, and the connections between them, and how are youth involved, and what kind of enabling environment can be provided to really promote and enhance youth-led engagement, in terms of the peace agenda. In terms of other gaps, as has been mentioned before, the security responses continue to proliferate, even though spending has decreased over the past decade, both national level and ODA, even as particularly violent extremist activity has increased. The ODA also continues to be more reactionary, focusing on humanitarian assistance. And I want to pick up, on what a previous speaker talked about, and looking at the long-term, goal and the long-term agenda. And so really applying also this humanitarian development peace nexus in early response to humanitarian assistance, whereby we can already start looking at the long-term approach. We all know the cost effectiveness, of that, and the need to further invest in prevention. The other gaps, and I think this goes back a bit also to what Ambassador Fred, talked about the state, is the issues of early warning and early response. We've really improved the tools and the capacities at continental, sub-regional, national, community levels on analysis and early warning. But particularly when we're looking at national levels, the issues of early response then, have been more challenging to address. And this is really where we see the gap. So this is really worth, more interrogation. The other element is really the sustainability. I talk about infrastructures for peace. And, again, the need for this to be an ongoing lens rather than episodic. And for example, we often see these mechanisms particularly reactivated around elections. And so then we have resources that are put in, joined up approaches, and it dissipates after the elections. And in the period in between, you don't have these fully functioning mechanisms, although we know from good practice and tradition also the importance of ongoing dialogue and the issue of looking at subtle indicators of conflict or of violent extremism, which are easier to address when you see more of the subtle indicators, tensions within a community, proliferation of hate speech, and addressing it at that point before it really gets to a boiling point. The other element is expanding partnerships, going beyond peace builders and engaging with others. When I talk about informal or formal capacities for peace, some of these informal capacities are individuals within the community who are well respected. We have in 1993 in Wajir a beautiful story of Deka Ibrahim, who started the Peace and Development Committee, the first one that basically created the foundation for peace committees in Kenya. And she was a school teacher concerned about a local level conflict and got together, with other women and formed this. But also the role of the private sector and having them engaged, holding political actors accountable, being engaged in these types of discussions because they are also affected. They can also invest, in peace building and help in terms of the sustainability. And we have found some good models where there's been more of this expansion and inclusion of other actors really focusing on peace that have really helped in terms of, be it cooling down temperatures, particularly, in politically fraught situations. looking at the issues of measurement, which is a topic that I really like to speak to, quite a lot, because how are we measuring peace? And this is, as has been previously said, I mean, it's not just the absence of violence, but what are some of these positive peace indicators that we can use, and how can this inform long-term development planning as well, national development plans? We are seeing an interest in this, but this can further be enhanced. And although there is sometimes controversy about talking about prevention, I think it is more palatable when we talk about the prevention agenda, in some cases contributing to development rather than working on conflict, which gets a lot more sensitive. So really, there is really a need for increasing the support for both targeted prevention and peace-building initiatives, as well as the need to accelerate the drive to ensure prevention is fully integrated in all policy decisions and programming, including humanitarian work, and looking at also opportunities to support peace outcomes really at the various levels. Thank you.
Tremendous. Thank you very much, Madam Kiplagat. And so from both you and Madam Osman, we've had a range of gaps, when you analyze where we are at the moment, looking at best practice. I mean, we've heard about representation, conflict sensitivity, people being treated as participants instead of partners, the ODA, official development assistance, being too reactionary, lack of early warning or acting on early ones. As Ambassador Ngoga said, by the time it's on BBC or Al Jazeera, it's too late. It's too late. Expanding partnerships. And also, I like this one, holding political actors accountable. Very interesting. And there are lots of ways of doing that these days compared to even just 10 years ago. And this is something I hadn't thought about. How do you measure peace? Very interesting. How on earth do you measure peace? Yes. I don't know. This is something that we really need to work on, I think. Perhaps Dr. Handy has an answer for that. And also, perhaps you can assess the impact of approaches currently used for peace building and conflict prevention. And in your experience, what gaps do remain, Dr. Handy? And once you've spoken, then we've got a couple of questions that have come in the chat box, which we'll use for our Q&A. Dr. Handy.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you to the previous speakers for actually addressing a wide range of issues, which I have very little to add on, actually. Or maybe like to come back to 2 points. One is the early warning and early response issue that was mentioned just now by Madam Kiplagat, and then the private sector. On early warning and early response, what we've seen in Africa over the last 30 years is really a huge commitment to build early warning mechanisms and frameworks at the continental level and at the level of some regional economic communities as well. And they work relatively well. The missing link, as Mrs. Kiplagat was saying, is the national level. But in reality, that's the most important link. How many countries actually have national peace architectures, and consciously so, not just a bunch of institutions working unconsciously towards that same goal, but without actually knowing that they should be geared towards that. That very few, actually. Maybe that's, and I know that the UNDP has been working hard in trying to support government establishing those national peace architectures. I think that is key, because very often those peace architectures are misunderstood as defense architecture at a national level. But we know it's about peace, and it goes well beyond just the defense sector, which is just one aspect of it. And which brings me maybe also to the question of how do we measure peace? Yes. There have been a lot of attempts actually to try and address this. But the jury is still out, actually. So, and particularly in our time where traditional peace-building approaches struggle actually to address protracted instability. The nature of instability is constantly changing, forcing actually instruments, solutions to adapt. But we know how difficult it is. Let's say if we take the context of a peace support operation, it's extremely complicated to change the tools while the peace support operation is running. And there are many examples. It is one of the reasons why some peace operations last forever, which is always an indicator that, yes, achieving peace is a long-term issue, but must it be within the framework of a peace support operation? Is it the right way of addressing those issues? Is it the cheapest way of doing it as well? So this, the jury is out for those questions. The last point I would like to mention has also been addressed by some.
I think Dr. Handy is frozen, but let's see if we can get him back. If not, I'm going to go through a number of the comments and questions that you sent in through your Q&A, and we'll try and answer one or two of them. Thank you very much to you, John Simons. You've been asking about the tools for ensuring political accountability, but you say also it may be too late when it's on the news, but that's often the trigger for action, costly action. It's human nature. When you have a leaking roof, most will leave the repairs until it starts to rain. You're very right on that one. You're very right on that one. And a lot of you, thank you very much, El Haj Tadi Tiam, for sending in your comments. Arsenio Mutatise from Mozambique, your student in Japan, Tohoku University, thank you for that. I think we're going to answer one of your questions. And we've got an attendee who's anonymous asking whether the African overpopulation is seen in the context of the pace of economic development, which seems to lag behind. But yes, you admit inequality is a driver for conflict on the continent. Let's see if we have Dr. Handy back. Dr. Handy, are you still with us? Let's see if we can find you. Because we have a question, which I think...
I am back. Sorry.
Good. I've got a question for connection. You. Okay? I've got a question for you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now? Yes, I can certainly hear you, Paul Simon. I'm going to wait. Let's ask you this question, okay? If you're on the line. And this one is from a student in Tohoku University asking, how can young people get to convince politicians to engage on functional and reliable politics? Do young people need to do it by themselves? How can we do it? So they want to convince politicians to engage meaningfully with them. Dr. Handy.
Interesting question. How? I think it would depend on the context, but this question probably comes from a very engaged student, committed student, because I think what young people should do is to engage in their community, be it politically, in social work, to go beyond the usual and address social issues. That is the only way, in my view, that they can actually not only increase pressure on politicians or policymakers, but also do it themselves. It's a combination of two, putting pressure on the one hand on decision makers, but also creating spaces for young people to express themselves. They shouldn't necessarily wait for the space to be allocated to them. They have leeway, they should use it. and with information technology increasing, as we know, they master these tools. Actually, they are much smarter in understanding certain trends than actually those we should be taking decisions. So I think they have some room that they should use instead of always waiting for space to be created by the political principles.
Very good. Thank you very much, Paul Simon. I'm just wondering, Madam Osman, if you can pick up that question as well from Arsenio, the student in Tohoku University, who wants to know how young people can convince politicians to engage on functional and reliable politics. I mean, really, politicians, Madam Osman, often pay lip service to young people, treating them as participants and not partners. In your experience, how can they convince them to take them seriously?
نعم، سمعت السؤال، وأنا أعتقد بأن الحقوق تنتزع ولا تطلب. إذن كما قال الدكتور سابقا، هذا يعتمد على السياق الذي نود فيه أن نطالب بحقوق معينة أو بإشراك الشباب تحديدا في المجال السياسي. أحيانا نحن نحتاج إلى انتزاع حقنا كشباب في الممارسة السياسية، وذلك يكون عن طريق طرق مختلفة ومتنوعة، مثل الضغط الإعلامي، مثل تكوين الشبكات networking، مثل القيام بمبادرات شبابية خالصة كما ذكر، وهذه المبادرات الشبابية تسعى لخلق منصات تفرض هذه الطلبات. أحيانا في سياقات نجد أن السياسيين يقومون بإقصاء الشباب جهلا منهم بأهمية إشراك الشباب، وجهلا منهم بالدور الذي يمكن أن يلعبه الشباب. في هذه السياقات وفي هذه الأوضاع يمكننا العمل على رفع الوعي بأهمية إشراك الشباب وأهمية إشراك النساء. ولكن في سياقات أخرى كما ذكرت سابقا، نحن يعني كلمة إقناع السياسيين هذه أعتبرها كلمة ناعمة جدا بالمقارنة مع الإقصاء الكبير الذي يتعرض له الشباب. إذن فنحن هنا لا نقنع، ولكننا نفرض وجودنا. قيادية في مجالات خارج السياسة يمكن أن نمثل أمثلة حية للدور الذي يمكن أن يلعبه الشباب. فحينما يقتنع المجتمع، وعندما يرى حقيقة بعد أن يرى الدور الذي يمكن أن يلعبه الشباب، بعدها لن نحتاج إلى الإقناع، وسيتقبل الجميع دور الشباب بسهولة. ولكني أوصي بالتشبيك بين الشباب وبالضغط الإعلامي. لا يمكننا أن ننكر دور الإعلام في تغيير حكومات بأكملها، ناهيك عن تغيير قراراتها. شكرا.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Osman. That's really interesting. So the young people have tools. This is to Arsenio, who asked the question. There are very many tools now that the youth can use to put pressure on these politicians to take them seriously so that they will not be ignored. And they can also do things themselves. And if these things are successful, the politicians will want to get involved. Very good. Thank you. Angela Lucigi has asked a question. She says, it would be good to have some examples on using indicators of positive peace. And I have to go back to Madame Kiplagat on that. Some examples of indicators of positive peace. Your thoughts on that? I can see you smiling. Okay, it means you have some.
Thank you, and thank you, Angela, for the question. And as mentioned, by a previous speaker, there's been a lot of investment, in terms of looking at how do we better measure the work that's being done, around prevention, and how do we really measure peace. Among, some of the indicators, trust is a key one, as mentioned, often in terms of trust in government, trust in security, services. So what is the trust levels between communities, between youth, in particular, and these institutions? The other element, when we're talking about very much, of the future, is perception of opportunities. that exist. And as mentioned in terms of, for example, our livelihoods, peace building programs, if I can frame them as such, we're not looking at just, the economic opportunities that then are availed to these, particularly youth-focused and the numbers employed, but also how have their perceptions changed from, when they've been identified as at-risk, youth, and then looking at, do they see that they have opportunities? Issues of inclusion, within the community, and this is the other element when we talk about real or perceived marginalization. So again, looking at what opportunities, do exist. So these are some of the components where it's looking at more of the soft side. And in terms of also the type of work on, peace building, we're also looking more at behavioral science and looking at changes of behavior. And some of these programs have now been integrated into school curricula. And again, in terms of the measurement, and this is key, particularly when you look at, one of the indicators, the propensity or the belief that violence can be used as a tool to address issues. So then really changing that perception as well as, the behavior, indicators. And last one is there's been more of an integration of mental health and, looking more also in terms of the sort of holistic piece, how to also look at that at individual levels, community, and then more at a national level. So let me stop there, but just a few examples.
Indeed, thank you very much indeed, Madame Kiplagat. There's a question en français. My French is not as good as it was before, but it's Jeanette Mondongu Kamara, and I'm going to try and translate. But I mean, she says here, some people think that there's a link between the countries, those countries, or the multinationals who are not really helping to promote peace in some of the developing countries because the conflict situations favor pillage of natural resources. What do you think? Now, I hear quite a number of Africans saying this, Dr. Handy. They feel that these larger institutions and some of the industrialized countries like instability in African countries to continue because it enables them to continue the rape and pillage of natural resources. Do you have a brief response to that, please? Paul Simon. Paul Simon, have we lost you? I think we may have done. I think we've lost you. Let me see if Madam Osman, do you have a quick thought on that? Is this something that young people say in Sudan? Do they think that one of the reasons why things are unstable is the pressure or interference from outside making it favorable for things to remain unstable? Madam Osman, I think we may have lost you as well. Is that right?
لا أنا أسمعك بوضوح.
You are with us.
Yes. أيوة هذه هذه من المقولات الشائعة جدا خصوصا وسط الشباب في السودان، وفي رأيي الشخصي أن هذه المقولة فيها شيء من الصحة. فنحن نعلم الدور الكبير الذي تلعبه المحاور في استقطاب فاعلين سياسيين تجاه
Okay. I understand. Well, I think we are coming toward the end of our session anyway. Thank you very much indeed for that. What we need to do is to comment briefly on Ticad because it is coming up soon. It is the 8th Ticad. The last one was in Yokohama in Japan. I was there in 2019. Before that, it was in Nairobi, Kenya. So let's see if we have, do we still have our speakers? Are you still with us, Madam Kiplagat, Madam Osman, and Dr. Handy? Because I just want very briefly to hear what you are hoping for from Ticad. Madam Osman, very briefly, if you are with us.
Yes,
If not, that's okay. I'll go back to Madam Kiplagat. Okay, Madam Osman, briefly, yes? Very briefly.
ما أتوقعه من مؤتمر تيكاد القادم هو أن يتيح مساحة حقيقية لآراء الشباب والنساء، ولا يكتفي فقط بسماعها وتوفير المساحات لقولها، بل يقوم بنقلها إلى صانعي السياسات في شكل مقترح سياسات على المستوى العالمي والإقليمي فيما يخص القارة الأفريقية. إذن وصيتي هي، أو ما أتوقعه هو، أن يتم التعامل بصورة جادة مع مقترحات النساء والشباب التي تخرج في هذا المؤتمر. وشكرا.
Thank you very much. And to Madam Kiplagat from the UNDP, one of the co-hosts of today's conference, looking ahead to Ticad 8 in Tunisia in August. Your thoughts, what are you hoping for?
Thank you very much. So, I mean, I will stick, in terms of, the overall theme and looking at the primacy of the prevention agenda and, really looking at coming out with strong recommendations on really continuing to support this linkage of looking at governance, governance as an enabler for peace, development, and, peace really being fully integrated. And secondly, really looking at also the opportunities, that we have around that and how to fully utilize them. We have a very advanced peace architecture, as has been mentioned, and mechanisms. We have strong regional blocks and stronger regional integration. I mean, recently we saw DRC joining the East Africa community and having this spread of one economic bloc from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. How can we then have, further opportunities in terms of economic development that can contribute, to peace? And looking at the issues of climate and energy transfers and the opportunities that exist, for the continent in that front. So, for me, really looking at this very integrated and holistic approach, looking at current opportunities and really leveraging upon what we have to really build and maintain sustainable peace and address the current conflict and violence that we see on the continent. Thank you.
Tremendous. Thank you very much for that. Looking forward to being in Tunisia with you all toward the end of August. Dr. Handy is back. Briefly then, your thoughts. What are you hoping for from Ticad 8 in Tunisia in August?
Two things, and I think that even the previous Ticad have addressed those. The first is how Ticad actually links its activities to the UNDP Sustainable Development Goals, because as I was saying, one way of actually addressing development and peace is to look at how we improve structural factors, and the SDGs are a fantastic way of looking at it and making sure that we have very focused and targeted interventions. The second is actually also Ticad's attempt to build partnerships between the public and the private sectors. We need to increase the levels of engagement of the private sector, because at the end of the day, the private sector, a booming, a thriving private sector, is what creates jobs. It's what includes youth, actually, and it's what produce an added value into development. So this is what I'm expecting. It's a long-term endeavor. It's not going to happen in the space of 4 to 5 years, because real life is much longer than that. Thank you.
It is. Indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Handy. Thank you very much, Madam Osman, and also Madam Kiplagat, and to our other speakers as well, Ambassador Ngonga, and earlier, Dr. Fonte Akum, and Ambassador Jun Shimi, and also to Madam Ezia Konwa. Tremendous. What a lineup of speakers. Highlights, just a few of them: the establishment of measurement indicators for peace, not only negative terms, but with positive indicators. People want to see that. Building peace-building architecture at the national level for early warning and response. Political commitment, you've talked about that, some of you, holding people accountable and being engaged. Sensitivity, very key, equipped with humility, deep understanding on the context and root causes, not just the flowers, it's too late by then. Coordination of key players, women and youth representation, not just about participation, but maximizing opportunities. And ultimately, and this runs like a thread through everything you've all said, it's about building trust and resilience. Ambassador Ngonga has sent his apologies. He had a lot to say, but unfortunately, we only got a little bit of it. But hopefully we'll see him again in Ticad, number 8, in August in Tunisia. Thank you very much to our speakers. Lastly, to all our delegates, our participants listening in as well. A good 200 of you still with us. I would like to inform you that the UNDP recently launched a manga publication, which is a depiction of real-life experiences of people living in the Liptako Gurma region, to give a platform to communities to elevate their voices about their communities. It's a slice of life meant to showcase the resilience of cross-border communities and their efforts to engage local, regional, and global audiences and partners to support peace-building efforts with local solutions. Now, the link to the virtual publication will be sent to you after the session. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Until next time, thank you very much and stay safe.